Hey everyone, yesterday I released a video where I talked about the map update and it came out just a little bit too long. So this video is continuation of that one where I talk a little bit more about some other things. So one of the big talks that I want to have with you guys is how would Ukraine win this war? And I'm going to stay with the map, not going into the vlogging camera again. So there is a lot of discussions about basically, let's put it this way. Russia are having a lot of moral defeats, right? We know that Russia still have a lot of equipment, so probably getting through the Russian equipment fully will take some time, especially because it's getting reinforced. Yes, the equipment is old, but there still are battle-capable troops, even with the old tanks and so on. And now with the mobilized men coming in, it still creates like this density of lines, and it's still very annoying to fight against for the Ukrainians. They need time to grind it all down. And that's why, hence, they also can advance and make some assaults in certain directions. This, however, can all change because the moral standing of Russians is definitely falling. One of the major things someone discussed is like, well, what would be the devastating losses for the Russians to essentially lose the war? The first one being Luhansk and Donetsk. That is the two towns that are making the so-called Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic that are now technically Russia. But the point is, if these two cities fall, that would be a major blow. Basically, the question then would be in the air, why is Russia fighting if there is already no more like Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic? If there's just Crimea and Ukraine, for example, is already like, going towards Melitopol and so on, while clearing this, then what's the problem? That is one option. The second option is obviously the crown jewel of Putin's regime, Crimea, the one that he stole, and then the whole world's community was kind of saying, yeah, it's not nice that you did it, but, like maybe, we should try to get around it. Yeah, we're gonna say that you did it bad, but then still supply you with all the technology and all the military assets that you need to modernize your army. That was the situation. Not anymore, thankfully, a little bit, but there's still some kind of a desire from some people. I'm not going to tell politicians because it feels that a lot of the politicians now are kind of getting over it and now are accepting that Russia is a terrorist state that is just committing war crimes. So which one is then would Ukraine need to essentially achieve of these objectives to kind of break the Russian morale? Like if it's been bent after Kherson and a lot of reports are coming in that morale in the Russians is suffering, what of these two objectives need to be done to break them? And the question here lies in something that pretty much every single one of you that's watching, following this war kind of stands. We need to consider where the Russian logistics are stronger. So where the strong logistics are stronger, there probably is the weak point of the Russians. And while a lot of people are saying, yes, like Crimea, it looks like it's a peninsula. It has this narrow access point, which is easy to block and defend for the Russians. And yeah, it's very hard to enter it. The actual truth is that these two towns is actually a bigger problem than Crimea. Firstly, because getting to them is still a problem. It's a heavily fortified position. If you can see this red line that goes around the towns, this is the old contact point from 2014 and onward. That is a very heavily fortified position. I've talked about it before, and we were all laughing after the the Kharkiv operation that there was no man to man this line. Now we know that Russia has enough mobilized men, so now there is a lot of bodies in those trenches. That is one thing. Secondly, while all of the people iron focused, there has been like daily someone asked me like, why doesn't Ukraine strike Troitsky? Why doesn't Ukraine strike Troitsky to cut this? If you see white line is the railway line. What they don't really tell you is, and I don't understand why, is that there is coming the train lines from Russia as well into the Donetsk and into Luhansk from this side. So to get to them, like essentially Ukraine would need a full encirclement of the city. That is not an easy task. Remember trying to encircle Kharkiv by the Russian forces? That didn't went that well. It's a big city. Both Luhansk and Donetsk, Donetsk especially, are huge city. Donetsk used to be a million or more than million people city. It's really urbanized. Like an urban combat is quite hard. And we also know that the Donetsk and People's Republic armies that were fighting since 2014 is one of the more battle-capable troops. I'm not talking about the mobilized people. I'm talking about the, the logical, the ones that are essentially brainwashed, and the ones that are telling you that they're fighting Nazis. They are quite battle-capable. So these two, when you start thinking about it, it's a very problematic target to strike. This is not the same with Crimea. We all know that Kerch Bridge is a bottleneck for the Russians. We see now that with the Kerch Bridge down, it's a big problem for the Russians to supply this area, especially if we get if Ukraine gets to Berdyansk and this kind of part here, so they can actually use some of their missiles to strike even more into the Crimean Bridge. And if this Crimean bridge is down and Ukraine, for example, is blockading this part, then this turns into big old Kherson trap. Do you remember that one? Except now there is no bridges. And that is going to be tough for the Russians. And I was previously saying there is a lot of supplies in Crimea. And well, now I'm not as certain. The fact that the Kherson was decided to pull the people from Kherson out, that is good, because while maybe there is a lot of, artillery shells and so on in Crimea's military bases, the supplies are also meaning like fuel, food, and other things that are required to sustain the army battle capabilities. The Kherson operation showed that it's not only about the guns. That would mean if Ukraine would stand here, if they would take out the bridge, then they can just slowly choke out the Crimean Peninsula. And that would be a lot easier done than taking and surrounding two big cities. So in that sense, I think that it's actually going to be Crimea that will be targeted first, and then it will be Luhansk and Donetsk. Obviously, this is kind of my speculation, though based on a lot of the analytical thoughts that I'm listening to, but something definitely to consider. And then to kind of finalize a little bit more, two topics that I want to talk about. Well, let's cut it to one because I've spoken quite a lot. So there is a big discussion right now coming in about the some kind of video where Ukrainians are executing the Russian prisoners of war, and I need to talk about this because it's a complete disaster. Why is it even surfacing? So in that video, which I cannot show, unfortunately, but you can Google it up, it's all over the internet. In that video, there is about 7 or 8 already captured Russians that are laying on the ground, and there at some moment appears the next Russian, and he has a machine gun in his hand, or a Kalashnikov, whatever. And the point is that the firefight starts. And then obviously Ukrainians shoot at everything that moves or doesn't move or whatever, and they just execute the POWs. Now, why is this not a war crime? Well, let's put it this way. It is actually a war crime, except it's not the war crime that a lot of the pro-Russian propagandists are trying to make it look like. Why? Because it's actually a war crime, the actual war crime, to impersonate, to pretend that you're surrendering, and then actually engage the people that are taking you captives. That is a war crime. That is an actual war crime. So when one of the guys that were surrendering already pulled out a Kalashnikov, he literally broke the Geneva Convention again, like Russian. Secondly, why is it problematic with capturing at all? Why, if they executed POWs, that would still be okay? Because it's a very, very tight operation. So it's one of the most difficult interactions on the battlefield. Taking captives is very hard. The atmosphere is very, very tense. The person that is taking captives is in his full right to use any kind of lethal force, if he suspects that there is a threat to his life. For example, if he says that the person needs to hold his hands behind his head, and then he suddenly sneaks into his pocket. That is not a normal situation. That is literally the battlefield. He can have a grenade or anything in there, right? So it's a very tense situation to be in, especially if it's happening on a battlefield. So in this situation, even if the person would not be there, even if he would have a stick and started, like just throwing a stick towards Ukrainians, they are in full rights by the Geneva Convention to defend themselves. Because we saw that even the guy was even shooting Kalashnikov, and there was actually a continuation of the video with one of the Ukrainian troops being injured and ferried to the hospital. So it's a very tight situation that is completely understandable by the Ukrainians. And second point of this, it's actually quite sad that we are picking up these discussions when Russia is breaking every possible war crime every day. Every single missile that hits Ukrainian territory is a war crime because it's targeting civilian infrastructure. Like, Putin is not even hiding it anymore. He is striking civilian targets. That is the war crime. I know we already got very desensitized. I guess that's something like this. We got very desensitized to any kind of suffering from Ukrainian side. But if you cannot at least understand and be understandable that this one situation that is shady that Russians are producing and trying to put up, then put a bar chart together, put a counter on how many war crimes Russia has done, and Ukrainian just see the bar chart. Well, one is here and then the other one is somewhere over there. If that is not telling you anything, I don't know what is. And I know that most of you don't think about this. What I'm saying for you, and I'm hoping, is that whenever you see someone spreading this propaganda, you're going to tell him where exactly he needs to go. Big thanks for watching. Today's episode was a little bit longer, but I really wanted to finish talking, especially about the Crimea and what my thoughts are about this. Big thanks to the Patreons and supporters of this channel. I love you all, and see you next time.